Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, March the 10th, 2022. So a bit of excitement across the street this afternoon. I live in Victoria, BC, on Douglas Street. Right across from me, right across, go out on the balcony, and there it is, 20 yards away, is the former Paul's Motor Inn, which was a well-known Victoria hotel for decades, a bit of a Victoria landmark. Well, we have a homeless crisis in Victoria. And the reason we have a homeless crisis in Victoria is because the city of Victoria, in its wisdom, has decided that we must give stuff to the homeless. We must make their lives as pleasant as possible. So people from all over Canada have headed out for Victoria, which is the big rock candy mountain for Canada's homeless. So Paul's Motor Inn, bought by the government to house homeless. Right across the street from that, on Douglas Street, there's the Centre Inn, which is also bought by the government for the homeless. Another block and a half down, another hotel bought for the homeless, with the result that Douglas Street, pretty much from Yates to Bay Street, is now resembles an open-air lunatic asylum. One has become inured to the sight of people tweaking on some drug or another, floundering around, often shirtless, doing impromptu dances on the street, people screaming obscenities, pushing a cart. There's a woman who pushes a cart filled with stuff, who just goes back and forth on Douglas Street, screaming obscenities all day long. Right across the street at the former Paul's Motor Inn, the police are there every day. And ambulances there every day. And sometimes several times a day. Well, today I happened to pass by the balcony and I noticed there were police cars. More police cars than I'd ever seen before. There were 8 police cars and 2 ambulances. And then I noticed in the parking lot there was a armored vehicle, a police armored vehicle. And I suppose I was a bit jumpy because I was watching the movie I'm going to be talking about in about 90 minutes, which is called The Unknown Soldier, a Finnish movie, which is exceedingly violent and distressing. And then there was a rather enormous explosion from across the street. Well, I didn't know what it was. I had something of an idea, or I could guess, that the police were attempting to gain entry into some room. And a few minutes later, I walked down. The whole street from Douglas to Government had been cordoned off. And there was a cop there in the crosswalk. And I asked him about the explosion, what was responsible for the explosion. And he said, the police. And he didn't seem to be willing to be any more forthright than that. And then he said, it's just someone having a really bad day. That's what he said. There were cops on the roof. There were police in a bunch of them, in full tactical gear. They weren't Victoria police. They could have been RCMP, and I couldn't get a look at their close enough look at their badges. I don't know. They could have been from the Canadian military barracks, which is about a quarter mile down the road. I can't confirm that. I don't know what the rules are regarding military involvement in civilian fracas. But about half an hour ago, I noticed that the armored vehicle was gone. And let's see what the police have to say. There was some reporting on Twitter about this. The explosion was described as flashbangs. I can't speak to that. John Wyatt tweeted 2 hours ago, standoff at Paul's Motor in now. Flashbangs just went off. And let's go to the Victoria Police Twitter feed and see whether they have any update on this. Okay. GVERT off. This is 41 minutes ago. GVRT officers apprehended an armed man in crisis this afternoon after he threatened to kill himself with a knife. The man was transported to hospital for a mental health assessment after a more than 4-hour incident. Oh, okay. A man in crisis. Okay. Yeah, that's the way these things are described nowadays. Let me just do a search for Paul's Motor Inn. That's what they've taken the sign down. That's what people still call it. We have one of the most left-wing governments in, well, North America, in Victoria. And I suppose it's all very well to, to blame the crazy people or whatever, but the voters of Victoria keep voting for crazy people, crazier and crazier. And the city government of Victoria, oh, by the way, I walked by City Hall, which is, I don't know, about a 3-minute walk from here a couple of days ago, and the Canadian flag was not flying. The Ukrainian flag was flying because the city government of Victoria apparently has decided that the people of the Ukraine are more important to them than the people of Victoria. They give out free heroin and other drugs to these people. We have a crisis, an overdose crisis of illegal drugs in Victoria and in Vancouver. And the solution, of course, is to give them drugs. Drugs have ruined their lives, and apparently drugs will put them all back together again. Now, just as has happened in Vancouver, when you have this center point of craziness, it doesn't stay where it is. It expands. And the craziness in Victoria is expanding south along Douglas Street and Government Street towards the ocean in the direction of the U.S. border. And I can't say that I would recommend tourists coming to Victoria now. Stabbings, including fatal stabbings, are now routine on Yates Street, and Douglas and Yates Street could be considered the center of downtown Victoria. The tourist district is a little further south, but of course, in the tourist district, you've got people with plenty of money. You can beg them for money or demand money from them or cigarettes and the like. And I understand that in Vancouver now, it's becoming commonplace that when these people ask someone for a cigarette and they don't get it, they get stabby. And so, yes, we must here in Victoria do everything we can to make the lives better for people who are doing all they can to make everyone else's life a misery. And it's not just Douglas Street or Government Street. It moves east as well. The craziness. Crazy people like to move. They like to move around. So I would say that there's probably a couple of square miles of downtown Victoria which are dominated by crazy people now. And the solution apparently is more of the same. There are tent encampments all over Victoria, particularly on Pandora Street. And it just swells and swells and swells. You've got homeless people who are set up in in front of doors on Douglas Street and other streets with all of their, their carts and their tarps. And we got people shooting up drugs openly on Douglas Street. It's a really kind of a collapse of civilization. This might sound petty, but it's not petty to people who are pedestrians. That it's against the law to ride bicycles on the streets of Victoria. And the government of Victoria spent many millions of dollars building bike paths for bicyclists, but a fair number of them don't like to use the bike paths. They like the sidewalks, and they ride their bicycles at 10, 15 miles an hour, sometimes even faster. And twice in the last week, I've almost been flattened by one of these people. I had to jump into a doorway, and there were two bicyclists, very expensive bicycles, going very fast, at least 15 miles an hour. And one of these guys, who would nearly run me over, decided to remonstrate with me as he was moving further down the street. Oh, he wouldn't have hit you. He would have braked in time. Well, that certainly was reassuring. Now, of course, the cop shop is, about a 2-minute drive from where I live. And the cops here in Victoria are entirely reactive. I suppose if they wanted to, they could make it clear that people who ride bicycles on the sidewalks are, they're going to be dealt with. But no, they don't do things like that in Victoria. This city is, I moved here 20 years ago, and it's really like night and day now. Adam Sterling tweeted an hour ago, when COVID started, Paul's Motor Inn and the Capital City Centre Hotel, both sides of 1900 Douglas, had very different public profiles. Yes, that's one way to put it. Not sure when that will resolve itself. So let's have a look at the chat. Hello to Dan, who offers an explosive greeting to KMG and chat. Hello to Anrun, Zen Master, William Hicks, Palpcasso 88, Buddy. Anrun says, Kevin, what happened to the pinned tweets with the movie, book, and music lists? Yeah, they'll be back on Friday, okay? I will update them on Friday, and they will be pinned. Hello to Oscar Toe. David Wright says, yes, today's obligatory Seinfeld reference. Let's put these homeless to use. Give them rickshaws. Zen Master says, Kevin thought they were raiding his hotel room. No, not really. It's just one doesn't expect to hear really loud explosions. Dan says, bringing the Kiev experience directly to your doorstep. Victoria never ceases to amaze. Hello to Dr. Deadname, Palpcasso 88, John S. ASB News kicked off Twitter, says Palpcasso 88. But of course, we just must have Ukrainian propaganda on Twitter. That appears to be the rule. Hello to Clara Ka, who says the matriarchy is in its death drive. Where did the craziness come from? Asked Clara Ka. Well, I think I explained that a few minutes ago. The word went out across Canada that if you don't want to work, or you just want to do drugs and get, benefit thereby, come to Victoria. Hello to Jeff Godley. Oh, wait till it gets to Uplands, said Dan. Yeah, well, I had an old landlord of mine in Victoria who had a cafe on a Cormorant Street, not far from here. And one of the drug injection places, a government building, is right across the street on Blanchard. And he was quite bitter about the fact that he would call the police when these druggies came in demanding money or smashing stuff up or terrifying his wife. He'd call the police and they'd show up 30, 45 minutes later, notwithstanding that it's a 1-minute drive from the cop shop to this restaurant, which is no longer a restaurant. I believe it's become one of Victoria's 1,000 marijuana stores. And my former landlord said, well, yes, if this was happening in the uplands, the police wouldn't take so long to get there. The uplands are where Victoria's richest people live. Oscar Toe says, do older people watch Tucker and then Hannity and get confused? Dr. Deadname says, I would. Let's see. Hello to Buddy. All right. Are Victorians? No, I'm not going to repeat that. Hello to G's He Stall. What William Hicks says, Kevin, what percentage of those drug addicts are vaxxed? I can't say, but I will say this, that, you know, that apparently contact was going to give everyone COVID, and they were all going to die. But it's been noted that there doesn't seem to be a particularly bad COVID problem amongst the homeless. Hello to I Judas Fly Chai. Kevin, do you follow Russians with Attitude, says Chogokin 666. I think so. I'm there every day. I don't know. They've been saying, you know, you should go to their Telegram channel because they say it's just a matter of time before they're kicked off Twitter. Intelligent Design says, Kevin, this is the universe telling you to get serious finding an apartment. Yes. Note taken. So Victoria is like San Francisco now. It's getting there. It is getting there in several ways. I mean, just the madness on the streets, and also Victoria is becoming like Vancouver, which has become like Hong Kong. It is just a very strange irony. White Spot. There's a White Spot kitty corner from where I am right now, and White Spot is a famous or even legendary BC restaurant chain. It's kind of high end, and their branch, Kitty Corner, from where I am, which was there for decades, was closed a few months ago because apparently people stopped going because they don't like to, you know, enter from a war zone or leave the restaurant into a war zone. But all around this area, luxury high-rise condos are going up. So yes, the wealth above, the squalor below. So it's becoming like San Francisco in that way. And Victoria is becoming like San Francisco and Vancouver in the sense that only the rich and the destitute can afford to live there. But yeah, and of course the solution to that is 1.3 million new people in Canada over the next 3 years. Of course, they have to live somewhere, and you know, old stock Canadians are being pushed out of the cities that they built. But remember, the Great Replacement, it's not happening, but it's good that it is. Hello to Jim Smith and British American. Thank you for your compliment there, British American. Nothing like a flashbang to wake you up in the morning, says Dr. Deadname, who adds, if you're going to be colonized by China, can't you at least get some CCP law and order? British American says, what's needed in these cities these days are strapping 1930s cops wielding nightsticks and cracking skulls. Secular Cornism says, what are you drinking, Kevin? It's tea. It's just plain tea. Plain orange Pico tea. I drink it Russian style. With no milk. And in my case, no sugar. I know that the Russians like sugar. So I mentioned the Ukrainian flag flying, replacing the Canadian flag at Victoria City Hall, which leads us to an excellent essay by Spencer Clavin at the American Mind at americanmind.org. I think everything that he says is true, but I think there's something else going on here as well. Some of you might remember the nuclear winter panic or hysteria of the 1990s. And when it turned out that Ronald Reagan actually wanted peace and did not want to blow up the world, the nuclear winter hysteria, it just vanished almost overnight. But then coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, it was replaced almost immediately by the global warming panic, which is still going on. And of course, we added the COVID-19 panic 2 years ago. And I speculated a few years ago in a review of Alex Cox's film Repo Man, which you can find at the Two Kevins site on YouTube, that the Western world, or at least the Western elite and the aspirational class, seems to nurture a death wish. That they don't believe in God anymore, but they believe that they need to be punished regardless. Spencer Klavan writes, "A nation casts about in search of its God." Shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution, G.K. Chesterton predicted the fate of a godless empire. "Once abolish the God and the government becomes God," he wrote. "Close off the avenues of public piety, and people will cast about for some all-consuming secular ritual to make them pure. Naturally, they will intuit that any plausible surrogate God must have money, power, and the allegiance of millions. So when the hungry sheep look up, they look to the state." America is in this exact position. Americans have not lost their religion, writes Georgetown University professor Joshua Mitchell in America Awakening. Americans have relocated their religion to the realm of politics. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer faced some criticism when she lit a prayer candle in adoration of Stacey Abrams, who helped get out the Democratic vote in Georgia's Senate race. Well, that's one way to put it. But Whitmer was only expressing the spirit of the age. The summer before, private citizens and politicians alike took the knee in an act of ritual genuflection to George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests inspired by his death. Golden busts of Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Representative John Lewis were erected in New York's Union Square that fall after statues of traditional heroes had been desecrated and defaced for months. All over America and the West, new idols arose to demand fealty. None of this has changed, but it has accelerated. It is amazing how quickly the old gods are now forgotten and the new ones erected in their place. As each liturgy in turn proves ineffectual, the congregation reaches for a new set of symbols and sacraments. Fanatics have only just begun discarding their cloth masks, though everyone has known for months that they are basically useless. But even before the mandate started relaxing, special dispensations had been made for certain communicants in other denominations. Attendees at BLM's High Holy Days were excused from following COVID precautions. San Francisco Mayor London Breed expressed the underlying logic of it all when she said she didn't have to wear her mask at a concert because she was feeling the spirit. But the spirit goes where it pleases, and today it has moved on. Ukraine is our new crusade, our new first and final cause. COVID oblations have been put abruptly on hold. Joe Biden's State of the Union, in which the war predominated, was mask-free. Everything is now bedecked in blue and yellow. Russia's cultural treasures are being shunned as unclean. And last week in Reno, Nevada, observers gathered to decorate a monument with Ukraine's national flower. The monument consisted of 7 letters, "Believe." This has very little to do with ending the actual war, just as chanting defund the police has very little to do with helping Black people, and wearing a cloth mask has very little to do with preventing COVID. The real events which serve as pretexts for our religious fervor are in themselves serious and complex socio-political matters. Were we thinking clearly, we could discuss them like adults, but we are not thinking clearly. We are reaching in pitiable blindness for our God. Ukraine's defiance of Russian aggression is worthy of our admiration, says Spencer Klavan, and within limits, our support. But none of it will save us. None of it will make us clean. Like pagan celebrants whose chosen patron has failed to bring the rain, we are flailing to grasp at anything that can unify us and grant us virtue. A clean conscience is worth a buck or two, says CBS's Stephen Colbert, who is willing to pay as much as $15 a gallon if it will only wash him white like snow. But these new indulgences will not work any better than the old ones. We can pile up new ceremonies and festivals, revise the old ways, and carve out special protocols within them. We can impoverish ourselves and rend our garments in pursuit of environmental, racial, moral, or medical purity. But as Hebrews chapter 9 says, the gifts and sacrifices being offered are not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. There is and has only been one God who can do that. On the topic of secular religiosity, Libs of TikTok yesterday had a tweet, "What fresh hell is this?" And it turns out to be a Chasen Buttigieg, who is the husband of Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation, and he is getting a bunch of school children to pledge allegiance to the rainbow flag. Yes, seriously, there is a whole text, a parody of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. And at the end, he waves the rainbow flag over these children as if he is dispensing, holy water at a mass. Another example of secular religiosity we get from Amy Schumer, who was formerly a comedian and actress, but now is a tampon salesman. This is from David Eng at Breitbart. Amy Schumer, who is co-hosting this year's Academy Awards, has revealed that she plunged into depression after Donald Trump was elected president in 2016, rendering her unable to continue with her Comedy Central series. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, she atoned, note the word, atoned, for her past jokes about Black people, saying she participated in Black Lives Matter vigils, another religious word, and workshops every day for 6 months following the death of George Floyd. She also discussed her decision to go public with her liposuction. Schumer will co-host the Oscars with Wanda Sykes and Regina Hall, Sunday, March the 27th. It will mark the first time the ratings-challenged ABC telecast will have a host since Jimmy Kimmel did the honors 5 years ago. Oh, so the hosts are going to be Amy Schumer, a tampon salesman, Wanda Sykes, angry Black lesbian, and Regina Hall, Black actress. Do the Oscars, does ABC actually want people to watch this show? Why Wanda Sykes actually has a career is a mystery to me. No, it's not a mystery to me. The powers have decided that Wanda Sykes will be continued to be paid large sums of money for being angry and unfunny. Let's see. Let's look at the Daily Mail. Zelensky's former press secretary tweets and then deletes message saying it would be a tragedy if Kamala Harris becomes president, after VP laughs during Ukraine press conference. Yeah, she just can't stop. She can't help herself. It's like a mental condition, it would seem, or physical condition. But maybe she knows that she's a fake and nobody likes her. But apparently she is now the face of, or the international face of tough guy President Joe Biden. And here is another story from the Daily Mail by Jeff Earl and Rachel Bunyan. We will defend every inch of NATO. Kamala issues warning to Putin from Poland, and U.S. troops fire Stinger missiles in war games in Estonia, alongside 13,000 troops from 13 countries, amid fears Eastern Europe could be Russia's next target. Well, if Kamala says it, I guess you can count on it. Of course, the bitter irony, every inch of NATO territory, Kamala, who doesn't want to go to the U.S. border, it's only being invaded. Joe Biden pretty much threw the border open, but no, the border of the United States is not sacred. Whereas, of course, as everyone knows, NATO borders, especially the border of Ukraine is indeed sacred. Yes, that's the world we live in now. This is from Charlie Spearing at Breitbart. Vice President Kamala Harris suffered an embarrassing moment on the international stage Thursday during a press conference with the president of Poland in Warsaw. Each time a question was asked by a reporter, the vice president appeared uncertain who was expected to answer first, even though the question was directed at her. But after a reporter asked Harris a question about Ukrainian refugees and also a follow-up question to Polish President Andrzej Duda, Harris was surprised when Duda looked at her, expecting her to answer first. "Okay," she said awkwardly, pausing and looking down at her notes. "A friend in need is a friend indeed," she continued, bursting into laughter and gesturing to Duda to answer. Could she be on some drug cocktail which causes this strange behavior? There are plenty of ads on MeTV, well, for pharmaceuticals. It's mostly pharmaceutical ads, insurance aimed at old people, and various medical devices for old people. But lots of ads for antidepressants and also ads for the physical, tics and the like that one gets from taking antidepressants. Perhaps Kamala, as I say, perhaps she's taking some sort of cocktail. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Louis Gohmert, why I voted against Russian oil ban. He is a Republican member of the House of Representatives. There is no way I could vote to exchange getting oil from Putin or for getting oil from some other tyrant or country that wants to destroy America, which makes this a cynical political ploy. Until Democrats allow a vote that will help make America energy independent again, those of us who care about Americans on fixed incomes and Americans who are being bankrupted by Democrats' war on cheap energy must vote no on Democrats suspending energy imports from Russia Act. President Biden's outrageously calloused original decision on his first day to make America and Europe dependent on Russia, Iran, and Venezuela for oil while he chases a green new nightmare has made the world dangerous for democracy while funding those who will end our freedom. For some reason, America decided that Venezuela must be taken down, just as in the 1960s it had decided that Castro must be taken down. It didn't work in Cuba, and it has failed to work in Venezuela. But apparently Venezuela isn't a bad guy anymore. Venezuela is a good guy because it has oil, and its country's name is not Russia. That could be it. It could be as simple as that, actually. And this is from HuffPost. Representative Madison Cawthorn, a Republican of North Carolina, broke from his party support for Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and told supporters the embattled leader is a thug. Newly released footage of the remarks shows. Remember that Zelensky is a thug, Cawthorn, 26, says in the clip obtained by North Carolina TV station WRAL. Thursday. Remember that the Ukrainian government is incredibly corrupt and is incredibly evil and has been pushing woke ideologies. Cawthorn, who was running for re-election in November's election, made the comments while speaking with supporters in Asheville over the weekend, according to commentary in the Wall Street Journal by Karl Rove, who served as former President George W. Bush's deputy chief of staff. The extremist lawmaker, remember, this is a news story. The extremist lawmaker said on Twitter, after the video of his comments surfaced, that he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin's actions are disgusting. Still, he took another dig at the Ukrainian president, saying he should not push misinformation on America. In a later tweet, Cawthorn suggested Ukraine was pushing out false narratives about the conflict. Quote, propaganda is being used to entice America into another war. I do not want Americans dying because emotions pushed us into a conflict, unquote. Well, it's regardless of what one thinks about Madison Cawthorn, it's a very brave thing now in America to not scream that Putin must be assassinated, or there must be a putsch, or a July the 20th plot, or whatever. This is from Anthony Fiola and Leslie Roughton in the Washington Post. Outside the West, Putin is less isolated than you might think. In India, the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has refrained from denouncing the Russian invasion of Ukraine, describing it as a gripe between Moscow and NATO. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro said his nation will not take sides in the conflict, even as he dismissed Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky as a comedian. A senior South African official still calls Russia a friend through and through. From a perch in the West, it's easy to see a world standing against Russian President Vladimir Putin as Russian forces lay brutal siege to Ukrainian cities. Leaders in Washington and the capitals of Europe are slapping Moscow with sanction after sanction. In Western countries, Putin has come to be seen as a Bond villain caricature and antagonist to a heroic, beloved Zelensky. Even McDonald's suspended operations in Russia. Surely you're isolated if you can't buy a Big Mac. Look deeper, though, and the suggestion that Putin is isolated may still be something of a Western bias, an assumption based on a definition of the world as places of privilege, largely the United States, Europe, Canada, Australia, and Japan. Of the 193 members of the United Nations, 141 voted to condemn Moscow's unprovoked attack on its neighbors, but that majority vote doesn't tell the more nuanced stories. Many countries in the developing world, including some of Russia's closest allies, are unsettled by Putin's breach of Ukrainian sovereignty. Yet the giants of the global south, including India, Brazil, and South Africa, are hedging their bets, while China still publicly backs Putin. Even NATO member Turkey is acting coy, moving to shut off the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits to all warships, not just the Russians. You may have seen that the leader of Pakistan declared angrily that we are not slaves and that we will not jump when the Americans order us to. Now, I'm going to, let's see what Pat Buchanan has to say about this. This is his column of March the 8th. After Friday's NATO summit refused to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky said the Allies' failure to close the skies to Russian military aircraft gives a green light for further bombing of American cities. All the people who will die starting from this day will die because of you, Zelensky said to NATO, because of your weakness. His indictment of NATO for cowardice came after NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg ruled out a no-fly zone. Quote, NATO is not party to the conflict. NATO is a defensive alliance. We don't seek conflict with Russia. We should not have NATO planes operating over Ukrainian airspace or NATO troops on Ukrainian territory. Secretary of State Antony Blinken echoed Stoltenberg, ours is a defensive alliance. We seek no conflict. President Biden has been clear they were not going to get into a war with Russia. Sunday, Blinken expanded President Joe Biden has a responsibility to not get us into a direct conflict, a direct war with Russia, a nuclear power, and risk a war that expands even beyond Ukraine to Europe. What we're trying to do is end this war in Ukraine, not start a larger one. Buchanan concludes U.S. policy in summary: Ukrainians should keep fighting and dying and killing Russians while we stay out and cheer them on. Bottom line, we are not willing to risk war with Russia over Ukraine, as that nation of 44 million is not a vital interest nor a member of NATO. We will not establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine, as that would mean war with Russia. But had Russia attacked Estonia, not Ukraine, we would be at war with Russia because Estonia is a member of NATO. To repeat, if Russia attacks its neighbors Finland, Sweden, Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia, we stay out of the war. But if Russia attacks Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Slovakia, Romania, or Bulgaria, we go in, even at the risk of nuclear war. Does this seem logical? Does this make sense? Why are we committed to do for Bulgaria, risk war with Russia, what most all would agree would be insane in the case of Ukraine? Which is a good question. And better question is, why wasn't NATO dissolved in 1991 after the Soviet Union was formally dissolved? Yaroslav Baran was a former backroom boy for Prime Minister Stephen Harper, has a piece in Policy magazine, which is how would I say, a quasi-governmental mouthpiece in Canada. He is now, of course, a PR spiv. He is a National Strategic Communications Practice Lead. Wow, that's quite the title, isn't it? With Earnscliffe Strategies, he has led numerous democratic and capacity building projects in Ukraine, including election observation missions and training for civil society and parliamentary groups. He is also past president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in Ottawa and serves on the executive of the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. I would like to know, you've probably heard me say this before. Anytime a PR spiv is given space in a newspaper or magazine for an op-ed, they should be required to list, and it's easy on the internet, you could just put a link there, to a list of all of this PR spivery's clients. And I'd like to ask Yaroslav Baran, does his company represent the Ukraine? Does it represent Ukrainian companies? That would be interesting to know and vital, I think, but we don't get to ask questions like that. So Baran gives us a little history lesson. The Ukraine has always been a country. Yeah, okay, if you say so. But evil Moscow, has always tried to eliminate the Ukraine. When the Ukraine was swallowed up by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, yeah, apparently it wasn't the evil Russians who were behind that. So, yes, we're given a list of marching orders from this PR spiv. He concludes, the Kremlin's actions are those of a post-imperial atavism and insecurity, but they are very dangerous and they are crimes of passion. NATO must understand them for what they are, understand what is motivating them, and understand the psychology of the perpetrators. They also need to fully grasp the broader implications of failure to stop Russia or live up to real security commitments that have been made. Oh, what security commitments have been made to the Ukraine? Hanging in the balance may be the competition between two worldviews, a liberal democratic and a rules-based international order that upholds sovereignty and democracy, or an ascendancy of a Russo-Chinese autocratic world where great powers invade and partition at will, and where might is right. Oh, you mean like NATO and Serbia in 1999? Oh, rules-based. You're being mean to these muzzies. And Kosovo wants out. And of course, Kosovo must be let out. What's that about sovereignty? What's that about Westphalia? No. We've moved beyond that. It's a unipolar world now. So, of course, if NATO or the global American empire decides something, it is ever so liberal democratic. Of course, Yaroslav Baran is a Canadian, at least notionally so. And one wonders whether he had to choke back something describing Canada as a liberal democratic state after the government invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time over the truckers in Ottawa, and decided to steal money, to freeze bank accounts of people who'd made donations to what was then still a legal protest, deciding to leak the names of all of those people who had given money to the Freedom Convoy, getting the RCMP to trample old ladies with a horse. Yeah, very liberal democratic. But of course, if the elite does it, well, that's the argument from authority. And that's the only argument that we hear these days from them. Let's check out the Drudge Report. Putin moves on Kiev. Oh, I'm sorry. I made a mistake there. It's actually pronounced Kiev. 10,000 bottled napalm Molotov cocktails away. Yeah, okay. And who's holding these Molotov cocktails? Zelensky really seems to want as many Ukrainians dead as possible. Columns of Russian tanks wiped out in ambush. If you say so, troops say the real target is the USA. Zelensky winning support using World War II tactic. Satellites show possible hydraulic warfare. Fury at barbaric attack on children's hospital. At 91, siege of Leningrad survivor besieged again. Boy, they're really working this siege of Leningrad angle here. Biden personally killed Polish jet deal. Embassy draws Americans seeking to fight. U.S. police sending over extra gear. What? One of the world's deadliest snipers arrive. I wonder if he's called Stovka. War offers redemption to maligned Intel community because, of course, it does. Facebook to allow calls for violence. How does it end? Europe wonders who's next. Poland on edge. White House trying to prevent world war. Jussie Smollett, or Jussie Smollett, as the comedian Dave Chappelle calls him, and there's a picture of him weeping, fake weeping. Smollett declines to speak at sentencing in staged attack, and I noticed that he's wearing a mask. No one else in the picture is, but he is. And let's do a short rundown of headlines from antiwar.com. U.S. claims Russia may launch bio attack. That's what they call projection. U.S.-funded Ukrainian biolabs working with dangerous pathogens. Newland reveals U.S. biological research facilities in Ukraine. But of course, wait a minute, that's a conspiracy theory and it's disinformation. Again, they don't exist, but it's good that they do. Zelensky open to neutrality, won't cede territory. Ukraine says Russian airstrike hit hospital in Mariupol. Congress set to give the Pentagon $6.5 billion for Ukraine war. U.S. War Crimes Panel urges U.S. to probe deadly Syria raids. Israel, Syria coordination with Russia not impacted by Ukraine war. Iran returns to talks, says deal a political decision for U.S. Iran threatens revenge after Israel kills 2 guards in Syria strike. War in Ukraine could drive more people to crypto, according to analysts. And we have a piece here by Medea Benjamin and Nicholas Davies, how U.S. has empowered and armed neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Russian President Putin has claimed that he ordered the invasion of Ukraine to denazify its government, while Western officials, such as former U.S. Ambassador to Moscow Michael McFaul, have called this pure propaganda, insisting there are no Nazis in Ukraine. In the context of the Russian invasion, the post-2014 Ukrainian government's problematic relations with extreme right-wing groups and neo-Nazi parties has become an incendiary element on both sides of the propaganda war, with Russia exaggerating it as a pretext for war and the West trying to sweep it under the carpet. The reality behind the propaganda is that the West and its Ukrainian allies have opportunistically exploited and empowered the extreme right in Ukraine, first to pull off the 2014 coup, and then by redirecting it to fight separatists in eastern Ukraine. And far from denazifying Ukraine, the Russian invasion is likely to further empower Ukrainian international neo-Nazis as it attracts fighters from around the world and provides them with weapons, military training, and the combat experience that many of them are hungry for. Ukraine's neo-Nazi Svoboda Party and its founders, Oleg Tyahnybok and Andrei Paruby, played leading roles in the U.S.-backed coup in February 2014. Assistant Secretary Newland and Ambassador Pyatt mentioned Tyahnybok as one of the leaders they were working with on their infamous leaked phone call before the coup, even as they tried to exclude him from an official position in the post-coup government. As formerly peaceful protests in Kiev gave way to pitched battles with police and violent armed marches to try to break through police barricades and reach the parliament building, Svoboda members and the newly formed Right Sector militia, led by Dmytro Yarosh, battled police, spearheaded marches, and raided a police armory for weapons. By mid-February 2014, these men with guns were the de facto leaders of the Maidan movement. We will never know what kind of political transition peaceful protests alone would have led to in Ukraine, or how different the new government would have been if a peaceful political process had been allowed to take its course without interference by the United States or violent right-wing extremists. But it was Yarosh who took to the stage in the Maidan and rejected the February 21st, 2014 agreement negotiated by the French, German, and Polish foreign ministers, under which Yanukovych and opposition political leaders agreed to hold new elections later that year. Instead, Yarosh and right sector refused to disarm and led the climactic march on parliament that overthrew the government. Since 1991, Ukrainian elections had swung back and forth between leaders like President Viktor Yanukovych, who was from Donetsk and had close ties with Russia, and Western-backed leaders like President Yushchenko, who was elected in 2005. After the Orange Revolution that followed a disputed election, Ukraine's endemic corruption tainted every government, and rapid public disillusionment with whichever leader and party won power led to a seesaw between Western and Russian-aligned factions. In 2014, Nuland and the State Department got their favorite, Arseny Yatsenyuk, installed as prime minister of the post-coup government. He lasted 2 years until he too lost his job due to endless corruption scandals. Petro Poroshenko, the post-coup president, lasted a bit longer until 2019, even after his personal tax evasion schemes were exposed in the 2016 Panama Papers and 2017 Paradise Papers. When Yatsenyuk became prime minister, he rewarded Svoboda's role in the coup with 3 cabinet positions, including deputy prime minister and governorships of 3 of Ukraine's 25 provinces. Svoboda's Andrei Parubi was appointed chairman or speaker of parliament, a post he held for the next 5 years. After the coup, right sector helped to consolidate the new order by attacking and breaking up anti-coup protests in what their leader Yarosh described to Newsweek as a war to cleanse the country of Russian protesters. This campaign climaxed on May the 2nd with the massacre of 42 anti-coup protesters in a fiery inferno after they took shelter from right sector attackers in the trades union's house in Odessa. There's much more here. Again, this is at antiwar.com. It's by Medea Benjamin and Nicholas Davies. And we've already been to the Daily Mail, or the Daily Mail. And let's see if this Twitter feed has been crushed or not. Oh, Russians with Attitude is still up there. And yes, I am following it. They have 74,000 followers. And what's the latest here? We have some introductions to Russian history and current situation in Nikolaev, according to Telegram channel Rybar. Missile forces and artillery struck targets in the Korabelny district of Nikolaev, the Kolbakino airfield, and Voskresensk. There was renewed shelling and small arms battles in the north. The zone of control in the east of the region has expanded significantly. The Russian armed forces are taking control of settlements along the Novovorontsovka, Nikopol direction. FYI, the original ASB team at their Telegram channel say that this is a fake account. And, oh, this tweet is from a suspended account. All right. So what? ASB was taken down, and then someone came up with a parody account rather late in the day. Let's see what Pedro Gonzalez of Chronicles has to say. Well, before I do that, I'll just say I'm rather glad that the White House, the Biden White House, has made it clear that they are not interested in World War III, despite the urgings of Colonel Andrew Coyne and others. A story on Western intelligence operations in Ukraine coming soon. ASB was one of the main big accounts posting footage from the ground that showed Ukrainian units like Azov, that's a neo-Nazi unit, hiding among and terrorizing civilians, posting content that made Zelensky's regime look bad, and reporting the allegations of U.S. biochem weapons. Russia has requested a UN Security Council meeting Friday to discuss U.S. military biological activities in Ukraine. Oh, Nicholas Fondacaro tweets, Fox News' Jennifer Griffin expertly dismantles Russian propaganda about biolabs in Ukraine. Oh, this is the same woman who pushed two of the most egregious Ukrainian hoaxes of this war. And one of them was the Ghost of Kiev, the miracle fighter pilot. And the second was the Russians allegedly destroying the memorial at Babi Yar, both of which turned out to be false. But people are still listening to her for some reason. It's amazing how many people act like ASB military deserve to get suspended, Clint Ehrlich tweets. They are busy posting a few stories or predictions that turned out wrong. You think your favorite neocon sources are batting 1,000? 2 days ago, Newland claimed she was working with tech companies to take down fake stories. Presumably, Newland is the final arbiter of what is fake. Russia says U.S. has biological chemical weapons in Ukraine. U.S. denies, but Victoria Newland's testimony suggests we do. U.S. flips the script, pegs biochem weapons in Ukraine on Russia. Twitter suspends one of the big accounts that reported Russia's claims of U.S. biochem weapons. I have no idea, Gonzalez says, if ASB spanning was related to the biochem story, just pointing out the timeline. But ASB was one of the only accounts on here not doing the whole Reddit war shtick and trying to inform Westerners about the conflict. So, and moving, oh, yes, I mentioned Clint Ehrlich, who has enraged people by his appearances on Tucker Carlson's show. Let's see what he has to say. The difficulties Russia's military has faced in Ukraine make Putin less likely to invade NATO members. If we can just keep NATO out of this war, the odds of a future conflict with Russia will actually decrease. That's what makes fighting them now such a horrible idea. And no, the US has not taken down a number of crypto networks. This is the crypto equivalent of the internet being a series of tubes. Anyone reporting this is deeply clueless about the subject matter, and that person would be Jennifer Griffin of Fox News. If by crypto network they mean money laundering syndicate that uses crypto, they're abusing terminology so badly they still deserve to be ruthlessly mocked. They just approved violence against Russians on Facebook. Do you really think that's where all this ends? Soon every enemy group or so-called enemy group will be a fair target, including groups you belong to if you are not PC. And let's check out the latest from Summit News. Poll, majority of Americans blame Joe Biden for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. That would be 62%, who said they believe Putin would not have invaded if President Trump had been reelected. Biden admin bans unvaccinated tennis ace Novak Djokovic from competing. Ron DeSantis says, the governor of Florida says there's no place in Florida for a COVID theater. And again, I mentioned this before, but it's just too funny, so I'm going to repeat it. Biden tried to ask Saudis and UAE for more oil, but they refused to take his calls. That has to be embarrassing. That has to be terribly embarrassing. And I'll go over to informationliberation.com. Once again, Facebook, Instagram change hate speech rules to allow cause for violence against Russians. DuckDuckGo CEO announces Google-style censorship scheme of content deemed Russian disinformation. This is very disappointing. That is the search engine that I use, and the reason I use it is because it doesn't mess up your searches in order to put at the top stuff that Google wants you to read, because it's the narrative. But all must bend the knee, it would seem. And finally, on this subject, let's go to Vox Day. We don't know that it's the Vax, but it's the Vax. I'm not going to mention the particular case. Underestimating the enemy, a Russian military veteran provides his professional take on the Ukrainian operation. We underestimated the enemy's power of informational, ideological, psychological resistance. They were waiting for us. Literally on the very first day, with one click of American bloody fingers, they deprived us of the support of the civilian population and those AFU units ready to become neutral. Billions of dollars, thousands of IT guys, global military corporations cut Ukraine off from any objective information. It stank in our country. And our main losses were in the first 3 days. Now they will be rapidly reduced. Peacekeeping and humanitarian operations, like the Crimean one, are no longer carried out by the Russian army. The fighters received other orders, got involved, got angry, regrouped. Any hopes for active support from the civilian population and those parts of the AFU who had changed their mind were dispelled. There were few flowers and bread loaves to be seen. The people have been crushed by propaganda and lies, intimidated into insanity by the Nazis. Another important point was missed in the calculation. Almost 600,000 Ukrainians have passed through the ATO zone in the Donbass since 2014. Today, they have replenished the territorial defense everywhere. Many have something to fear, especially in the wake of fakes about executions without trial by the ATO. And let's go to the chat here before I talk about the Conservative Party of Canada. And I know you're all desperate for bulletins on that subject. British American says Vakte has offered good analysis of Russia, Ukraine, and I can't stand his Russia love. Sorry, his China love. Yes, that is exactly my position. True Greenbird says Russians didn't have mobile crematoriums. No, of course they didn't. Okay, but they did invade Ukraine. Russians didn't nearly blow up nuclear plant. Okay, but they did definitely invade Ukraine. Yes. What search engine should I use now? Asked Oscar Toe. Well, it's my understanding that DuckDuckGo is essentially, it's very similar to Bing, which is Microsoft's search engine. Yo Mama says, not the duck, you were the chosen one. Well, who else do we have here? Oh, Jen Griffin also pushed the mobile crematorium hoax, says Buddy. Jerome Loftus has some news. Jussie Smollett news, guilty several counts, 150 days in jail, 6-figure fines. Troy Greenberg says Victoria Newland looks like James Downey, the principal from Billy Madison. Okay. Farewell to John S., who says that he must sleep. Look to David the Gnome. America to Russia. This is not who you are, says Zen Master. Dancing Ban says, would Trump be at war if he had won the election? It's all academic, admittedly. There are no Nazis in the Ukraine at all, but if there are, they are misunderstood or being ironic, says Oscar Toe. No, as I said, about a week ago, imagine being crazy enough to be a Nazi. Not a crypto Nazi, but an avowed Nazi in 2022. So if you are considering what Azov Brigade, right sectors, Svoboda, and the like are capable of, they are capable of any enormity. Any enormity. And who else do we have here? I think I'm going to go to something that's rare in Canada, which is an example of a member of the regime media saying the quiet part out loud. This is from Althea Raj at the Toronto Star. Patrick Brown and Jean Charest have a deal that could make one of them the next Conservative leader. Patrick Brown was the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario until shortly before the last provincial election, in which there was a coup against him for reasons which remain unknown to this day. An election was going to be called. He was almost certainly going to win, and he was ousted. There was a CTV story that apparently that he had sexually harassed 2 teenage girls. The story originally said one of the girls was underage, and then that was amended. CTV has issued a clarification of its story and made a settlement with Patrick Brown. I found this story very strange because Patrick Brown gives off very strong gay vibes, very strong indeed. He is also exceedingly creepy to behold. Every time I see a picture of him, I think, has anyone ever checked his freezer for body parts? He's been in politics since he was, 20 years old, Patrick Brown. And he was a city councilor in Barrie, Ontario. I believe I interviewed him. I interviewed him like 25 years ago. And so now he's mayor of Brampton, which is a long way from Barrie and a long way from his former federal seat and former provincial seat. But apparently the Sikhs just love him. And there's a picture of Patrick Brown. I think he must be 19 or 20 years old, on the floor. He is prone on the floor at a laptop, and his weird haircut, his weird expression on his face, the stuff on the walls. I Like Mike t-shirt, a Jean Charest poster, a bunch of anti-Quebec separatist stuff, the flag of Quebec, let's boot the bloc. This guy he has no experience of the world, none whatsoever. And yet now he wants to be Prime Minister of Canada. The Conservative leadership race is about to get a whole lot more interesting. Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown, who is expected to announce his bid Sunday, and former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, who launches his candidacy Thursday, have forged a pact. Sources familiar with the strategy tell the Star. Could it lead the party to electing a more moderate leader? Yes, suddenly. The left-wing media of Canada has a particular interest in the Conservative Party. Oh, it must moderate. It must become even more like the Liberal Party than it is already. Jean Charest, he may have stopped, he may have resigned from this, but has been for several years a registered and paid lobbyist for Huawei. Yeah, that Chinese company. That gives you an idea of the extent to which Canada has been suborned by the Communist Party of China. So how this works, apparently, is that Charest supporters are all going to put Brown as their second choice on the ranked ballot and vice versa. We don't have proper conventions in Canada anymore. You only get to vote once. And then, it's the number who gets the most fifth or sixth or 13th choice that determines who the leader is. So I mentioned saying the quiet part out loud, and it's this, okay? So see, Brown thinks that the Conservatives need to modernize. They need to be more like Canada, well, more like immigrants, actually. The tens of thousands of Tamils, Sikhs, Lebanese, and Iraqis that Brown may sign up, whose communities tend to include many people with a more religious and conservative outlook, could prefer a challenger such as Leslyn Lewis, the MP for Haldimand and Norfolk, and the favorite of social conservative groups Campaign Life Coalition and Right Now, rather than Charest, a pro-choice candidate. No, they don't care. The Tamils, Sikhs, Lebanese, and Iraqis only care about favors. And as I pointed out before, this is a story that the Canadian media refuses to touch, although everyone in politics or follows it knows it to be the case, is that the leaders of all parties, all federal parties, and most of the provincial parties are chosen by instant phantom armies of Sikhs. Yeah, that's right. And this is what happened in British Columbia. Kevin Falcon was elected leader of the BC Liberal Party because he got the Sikh Phantom Army. The other candidates were crying foul at this because it was fraudulent. It was a fraudulent conspiracy. But let's read from a story from Business in Vancouver. BC Liberal Party staff informed the committee, a review committee, that 70% of the new memberships involved apparently racialized party members. It continues as it is recognized that language barriers will undoubtedly impact some racialized new party members and increase the likelihood that they may be flagged in the audit process. The LEOC has been reassured by staff that supports are in place to assist members through the entire process and in a multitude of languages. But in its statement Tuesday, it made clear that the committee does not use any form of demographic characteristics to identify individuals for audit. Broadcaster Jazz Johal, a former BC Liberal MLA, took to Twitter to call the campaign complaints a form of, quote, structural and institutional racism, unquote. He noted that in his experience, the, quote, front door or a seat at the table is not available to members of visible minorities in any meaningful way. He must be joking. The only way for these communities is to get involved in leadership races because it's the only place for a level playing field in politics. Yeah, this sounds like a very level playing field when suddenly you get thousands or tens of thousands or more of new members, and they're all Sikh. And many of them belong to other political parties, which should invalidate their vote. Many of them live in India. Many of them, in fact, are dead. But we are not allowed to talk about this. We are not allowed to talk about the fact that Canadian politicians, Jean Charest did it, Stephen Harper did it, Justin Trudeau has done it, Jason Kenney has done it. They campaigned for votes in the Punjab, in India. This is now routine in Canadian politics. But of course, it's racist to point it out. And I don't think I want to go through all of these articles about the media's sudden interest in the Conservative Party of Canada, how it needs to become more moderate and more urban. Look, these paper citizens vote for the parties that offer them the most, specifically. Offers the Sikhs the most, for instance. It's that simple. They're not interested in social issues, not interested at all. They're not really interested in politics as such. They're interested in gaining favor. Simple as that. A long piece by a fellow called Giles Hoffman at the American Mind. It's quite good. It's quite well written. And Giles Hoffman is the editor of the Asylum magazine. And it's called For Whom the Horns Honk. Will freedom survive the death of Canada's freedom convoy? The truckers' convoy was crushed as soon as the police were unleashed. It took law enforcement only 2 days to remove every protester and vehicle from Parliament Hill. They used simple riot control techniques. Friendly and fraternizing police were replaced with tactical units who had more protective equipment and better weapons and were unencumbered by body cameras and badge numbers. The suspension of usual protocols was likely planned to avoid accountability, since a future investigation would have been considered, especially due to the controversial invocation of the Emergency Act. The crowds remained dignified while getting thrashed, and thrashed includes arresting teams who were caught on video ramming gun stocks onto faces or not lunging knees into ribs to pummel already submitted protesters. The trucker crowd's resolution was powerful to observe and useless against an opponent with training and the instruments of force. For the naive protesters who believed that their good intentions were sufficient to stay firmly planted in Ottawa, they got a lesson in the rules of power. In the zero-sum nature of conflict, impersonal violence beats unarmed conviction, and because the demonstrators maintained their pacifism, their chance to hold the line sounded like movie dialogue. During the 2.5 weeks before our dispersal, and he was there on the spot, Giles Hoffman, there was a campaign of fear to dissuade new arrivals and the broadcast of threats to persuade truckers to leave. The regime made clear that their enemies were known to them. Ontario Provincial Police were seen handing out information leaflets to social media users who had made pro-convoy comments on Facebook as proactive contact to signal clearly that online activity was being monitored. A list of 92,000 donors to the convoy was published, in which names, email addresses, and postal codes were circulated online and amplified through the state press. Even Twitter pages were created for identifying donors by neighborhood, such as this one, which remains active weeks after the Convoy protest was dispersed. 2 crowdfunding platforms were sanctioned, withholding millions of dollars under the terrorist financing rules. Canada's financial intelligence agency, FinTrack, was given new permanent powers in monitoring online donations. The personal bank accounts of organizers and donors were frozen. Some are still unable to access their funds. A class action lawsuit was filed seeking $306 million in damages. The Ottawa Police, with the help of crisis management firm called Navigator Limited. Now, Tasha Karedin, the columnist, is a principal at Navigator Limited. She was seriously thinking of running for the Conservative leadership, but now she has decided to support Jean Charest. So the Ottawa Police began issuing menacing statements over their Twitter page, citing their ability to use cell phone location services, drone surveillance, and facial recognition software to identify protesters for months to come, with the guarantee of criminal and financial charges. Parents were warned about the imminent removal of their children by Child Protection Services. The police apprehended supporters caught furnishing supplies. Several organizers were arrested, some released without charge, while others continued to be detained for petty infractions. Yes, counseling mischief, which led to Amanda Litch being held without bail. She's finally out on bail, and being brought into the courtroom in shackles. Yes. Hoffman notes a lack of organization, particularly of operational security amongst the trucker leaders. Of course, professionals wouldn't have got involved in this in the first place, and I suppose that's the trade-off there. The only people willing to do anything to support freedom in my country are people who are not part of the elite in any regard. To become a member of the elite in Canada is to give up your soul to the devil in exchange for preferment. I mean, that's how it works. There is no opposition media allowed in this country. Well, you have Post-Millennial, and you've got Rebel News, Ezra Levant, and a couple of, fly-by-night organizations, or one-man or one-woman organizations. But to read, if you read the Canadian media, if you read the National Post, if you read the Globe and Mail, if you read the Toronto Star, if you read Global News and the CBC, and you compare it to, say, the Washington Post and the New York Times, you'd think, wow, there sure is a lot of diversity of opinion in the Washington Post and the New York Times. There isn't, of course. But for years, the United States has used Canada as a kind of, farm team. Idiotic ideas from Canada are adopted in the United States. And this, the way that the authorities handled the Freedom Convoy, I'm sure many members of the Biden administration, members of the FBI and the Department of Justice were paying very close attention to this, because you will see this coming to America soon. Here is a story by Kane at Citizen Free Press. According to, and what is this fellow's name? Jonathan Reiner, professor of medicine and surgery, interventional cardiologist, CNN medical analyst. He said on CNN, quote, Florida has a disgraceful surgeon general. Every child in this country should be vaccinated for coronavirus. The Surgeon General of Florida has been anti-mask, anti-vax. He's been discredited. It's an embarrassment, unquote. I suppose he's like one of those Japanese soldiers, in an island in the Pacific, who is not going to surrender even, decades later, until he gets, personal communication from the emperor. And what do we have here? Ooh, this is from thestate.com. Stealth Omicron cases are doubling in US, data shows. Is it a cause for concern? Is it a cause for panic, for hysteria? Well, they're going to try to whip it up, but we have, the Ukraine now. The Ukraine is where all our hopes and fears and nightmares reside. Corona is just so 2 years ago. And let's go here. New York. This is from Eugipius. Do COVID precautions work? Asked New York Times reporter David Leonhardt. Yes, he concludes, but they haven't made a big difference. It's amazing to see a journalist finally confronting all of the data we've discussed for over a year now. Quote, did Omicron spread less in parts of the US where social distancing and masking were more common? The answer is surprisingly unclear. Eugipius comments, it is honestly hard to write this without overmuch laughter. More from Leonhardt at the New York Times. Nationwide, the number of official COVID cases has recently been somewhat higher in heavily Democratic areas than Republican areas. No single statistic offers a definitive answer. When I look at all the evidence, I emerge thinking that liberal areas probably had slightly lower Omicron infection rates than conservative areas, but it is difficult to be sure. Heavily Democratic areas, really heavily Democratic areas, are heavily Black and also Hispanic. If you want to look at Blacks, Hispanics, and whites in terms of their receptivity to 1 jab, 2 jabs, and 3 jabs, Blacks are at the lowest, then Hispanics, then whites. Back to Eugipius, Leonhardt then commits a journalism. Rather than compare disease statistics across regions with different containment policies, he takes Trump vote share as a proxy for who is being more cautious. To the surprise of nobody outside the New York Times, he finds that the greater Trump vote share does not correlate with higher positive test rates. Quote, the lack of a clear pattern is itself striking. Remember, not only have Democratic voters been avoiding restaurants and wearing masks, they're also much more likely to be vaccinated and boosted. And vaccines substantially reduce the chances of infection. How can he write this? This is me, not Eugipius. After all this, after all of the data, how could he possibly put that in print? But he continues, combined, these factors seem as if they should have caused large differences in case rates. Eugipius comments, womp womp. The last 2 years have been nothing but the triumph of theory over evidence. I can no longer count all the Twitter exchanges I've had with people who are sure that lockdowns must work because reasons, and who can't see that they're nevertheless plainly not working. Back to Leonhardt. The first lesson is that COVID vaccines are remarkably effective at preventing severe illness. The second lesson is that interventions other than vaccination, like masking and distancing, are less powerful than we might wish. How could this be, given that scientific evidence suggests that mask wearing and social distancing can reduce the spread of a virus, unquote. Eugipius comments, this can be because the scientific evidence is of low quality, politically motivated, and obviously wrong. Leonhardt, though, is struggling with a very bad case of cognitive dissonance, and he prefers to think it is all down to Omicron being so infectious. Quote, I've come to think of the point this way. Imagine that you carry around a 6-sided die that determines whether you contract COVID, and you must roll it every time you enter an indoor space with other people. Without a mask, you will get COVID if you roll a 1 or a 2. With a mask, you will get COVID only if you roll a 1. You can probably see the problem. Either way, you'll almost certainly get COVID, unquote. Eugipius comments, this is a bad analogy. It's more like this. You need to inhale 5,000 virus particles to have a good chance at infection. An infected cough releases 1 million virus particles. An effective and tightly fitted mask may stop enough droplets to keep all but 100,000 of those particles out of the air. Those numbers are hypothetical, but you get the idea. This is why masks don't work. Leonhardt writes, there is a strong argument for continuing to remove other restrictions and returning to normal life. If those restrictions were costless, then their small benefits might still be worth it. But of course, they do have costs. Eugippius, after 2 years of social, cultural, and economic destruction, we are finally allowed to admit that non-pharmaceutical interventions have downsides. Back to Leonhardt. Masks hamper people's ability to communicate verbally and otherwise. Social distancing leads to the isolation and disruption that have fed so many problems over the past 2 years: mental health problems, elevated blood pressure, drug overdoses, violent crime, vehicle crashes, and more. If a new variant emerges and hospitals are again at the risk of being overwhelmed, then reinstating COVID restrictions may make sense again, despite their modest effects. But that's not where the country is today. Eugippius comments, why would Leonhardt ever hope for a return to masks now that he's admitted they have no purpose? It seemed impossible even 3 months ago, but it's true. Corona is ending. It's not over with everywhere, but it will be soon. It's just a matter of time. Update. Various commenters report that Leonhardt has been on the containment fence for a while. According to the hilarious analysis of Michael D'Ambrosio, for the full effect, you have to follow him regurgitate this story on a monthly basis the last year, each iteration inching slowly to the obviousness of it all. I feel bad for the guy because the final piece of the puzzle is right in front of him. If only for a moment, he should rerun his Trump counties of slightly higher mortality than Biden counties for, say, 2019 or 2009, and discover the same pattern was there all along. He is so close. Or maybe he can just Google, why do people die at slightly higher rates in rural areas compared to urban areas? And maybe he will find the answer all along right from his favorite institution, the Centers for Disease Control. Yes, those things that don't work, we should continue to do them anyway, because there's a lot of hysterical women out there of both sexes who demand it. Let's take a look at Alex Berenson's Substack. And of course, he's written a marvelous book about this called Pandemia. Are Australian customs officers allergic to Pandemia? True story. 2 Australian readers signed up for Unreported Truths as founding members, which, as I've mentioned once or twice, means a free signed copy of Pandemia. Thus, I dropped 2 copies of Pandemia in the mail. Cost me $79 each. Since Australia had some rule, I had to send it global priority mail because COVID. But hey, I aim to please. You paid your $300, I'll get you a book. Plus, I figured they live in everybody's favorite continent-sized democratic police state. They need all the help they can get. Lo and behold, a few days later, I get an email from down under. Hi, Alex. I received the book today, but it is soaking wet. The pages ripped right through your signature just from gently turning them. The book is also pretty deformed. Is there any chance I could get another? Photos attached. So I goes on back to the post office and I put another copy in the mail, another $80 in support of the United States Postal Service. And I put my feet back up for a job well done. Then last week, I hear from the other Aussie founding member. He never got the book. Did I send it? Mighty patient of him to wait 3 months before asking, I must say. I sure did. And the proof arrived in my mailbox the other day following a 20,000-mile round trip. Once again, the Australians claimed the book was wet, which it sure did not appear to be. Of course, correlation is not causation, etc., etc. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation, but let's just say I am not eager to keep trying my hand with the Australian customs system. I assume the second copy I sent to the first reader arrived, but who knows? Anyhow, if you don't live in Australia and you too would like a signed copy of Pandemia, you can become a founding member of Unreported Truths. Yes. You heard about the latest from New Zealand? That they thought they were going to have zero COVID, and didn't work. Didn't work. Another zero COVID fantasy bites the dust. As this is from the Associated Press, March the 8th, as virus cases go from 1 to 24,000, New Zealand changes tack. And I joked on Twitter that when Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, heard this news, her shriek was so powerful, so terrifying, that it caused Mount Doom to erupt, inundating both islands with molten lava and ash. New Zealand, sadly, is no more. That's not actually true, but you knew that, right? Oh, yes. Remember the Great Reset? Yeah, apparently we're beginning to learn more about the Great Reset. Yeah, if you can't afford an electric car, you're not going to be able to drive. And that's a good thing. And also, yeah, it's going to become difficult, to pay for your heating and electricity in your abode, unless, of course, you're rich. And if you're not rich, what's wrong with you? You should have chosen better parents. But we've heard this for other reasons. But this is from Michael Hertzer at Bloomberg. Americans may have to say goodbye to steak and burgers as beef costs rise. Americans could be cutting steaks and burgers from their diets as inflation soars if beef packer profit margins are any indication. Processors like Tyson Foods and JBS USA are making the least amount of money per head of cattle slaughtered in more than 2 years, according to data from Hedger's Edge. That's a sign that demand for the luxury meat is flagging. Hamburger is luxury meat now? Golly, that really is a great reset. Consumers are more likely to splurge on steaks and chops when the stock market is up. The stock market. Oh, okay. Really? How many Americans are directly invested in the stock market? That's in doubt as Russia's invasion of Ukraine pressures markets. Meat prices are part of what's behind soaring inflation. That's the worst in 4 decades, and consumers are getting sticker shock. Okay. Yeah. So, the World Economic Forum, of course, has informed us that by 2030, you will own nothing, you will have no privacy, and you will love it. Maybe we'll get there before 2030. What do you think? What do you think? War is a useful excuse for taking away people's freedoms, freedoms that they had taken for granted. It happens with every war. Now, of course, the United States is not involved in this war in Ukraine, but it's being used as an excuse for every nasty thing that comes down the pike. Apparently, Kim Kardashian is ticked off that a lot of lazy people out there. And Kim Kardashian got to be so very wealthy because she made a sex tape with someone called Ray J. Now, there's lots of sex tapes out there, but hers was different. Now, I'm not going to describe what supposedly happened in the unexpurgated version of the sex tape, but let's just say that it's entirely disgusting. So I suppose her sex tape flew off the shelves. Now, of course, she and her mother have lied about this because, oh, yes, these are bootlegs. No permission was granted. No, they signed. They signed, because if they weren't signed, the companies that sold these videos, they would be shut down and their owners put in prison. So they've lied about that from the beginning. And then Kim Kardashian, a show was built around her and her worthless siblings, full siblings and half siblings, and their demonic mother. Yeah, it's nice work if you can get it. I worked my little college ass off for free for Kimberly. Now Kim Kardashian gets called out by former unpaid intern after billionaire's controversial criticism of women's work ethic. Kim Kardashian, 41, was lambasted on social media for comments to Variety. She complained nobody wants to work and urged women to get their ass up. Celine Zavala wrote that she worked her ass off for free as Kim's unpaid intern. Other Twitter users called the comments tone deaf and highlighted her wealth. Kardashian is set to appear on a new reality series, The Kardashians, for Hulu. When I was working in San Diego, this subject of interns came up. And my boss, the late Peter Weisbach, said, no, that was not going to happen. And the reason was that he told me that a few years earlier, he had someone who wanted to gain some experience, working for him. And he said, look, I'll work for free. And okay, sure. Well, a couple of years later, this fellow sued And he won. He won back pay because it was settled law at that time that people can't work for free. It's a form of slavery or indentured servitude. But now, of course, we are also progressive. That is the dream of every college student, to be offered a coveted job. Oh, I don't know, working 60, 70, 80 hours a week for nothing, and putting up with the insane demands of people in the media or Hollywood. Again, people who complain they should have richer parents. Again, they made a bad choice in parents. And let's talk about, doing well by doing good. Once again, after the world economy nearly fell apart entirely in 2008, I thought, well, it's clear that the surplus of capitalism is over, and all of this parasitism in the economy is going to be flushed out of the system. Boy, I sure was wrong about that. There is more parasitism than ever. Consider this. It's reported in the last couple of weeks that civil servants in Canada have been ordered to return to the office. They've effectively been working from home for 2 years now. And their productivity, one can imagine it. So what this should mean is that since it demonstrates that a considerable proportion of civil servants are useless, they should be fired, which would be very good, for budget deficits, because civil servants are very well paid. But nope, that didn't happen. And of course, now we have diversity, inclusion, and equity, DIE, DIE, which is perhaps the greatest level of parasitism that we have ever seen in the West. Sam Leith has a piece at unheard.com, How Anti-Racism Can Make You Rich. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. These wise words can be found in any number of Instagram statuses attributed to any number of people who didn't say them. How would we recast them for the age of late capitalism? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they find a way to make money out of you. Put that on a 20-pound t-shirt next to a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. In stage 3 of this process, as seen during the Black Lives Matter protests, you'll remember right-wing media were filled with hair-raising scare stories about what BLM really wanted. Revealed, burbled at the Daily Mail. The British arm of Black Lives Matter's full agenda: abolish the police, smash capitalism, and close all prisons. No reference to this loose and decentralized racial justice movement went unaccompanied by mention that 3 of the prominent figures in it had described themselves as, quote, trained Marxist, unquote. You feel on stronger ground, I suppose, resisting a movement that you've decided wants to tear capitalist society and its institutions to bits, than one that asks us to give people of color an equitable stake in society and the hope of walking the streets without being harassed by the cops. Yet capitalism being miraculously forgiving, we have now entered stage 4. Robin DiAngelo of White Fragility fame makes her main living as a diversity consultant and is reported to charge north of £10,000 for a speech. She lectured Coca-Cola last year on confronting racism. An embrace of new books in her tradition indicates that far from wanting to smash for-profit workplaces, the diversity industrial complex now wants to make capitalism safe for diversity. We have reached the stage, in other words, that trained Marxists would call co-optation. 2 books, one by Yvonne, and I've never seen this spelling before, capital Y dash capital V O-N-N-E, Hutchinson, How to Talk to Your Boss About Race, Speaking Up Without Getting Shut Down, and the other, A Judgment-Free Guide to Diversity and Inclusion for Straight White Men, by Felicity Hassan and Suki Sandhu, are similar in scope and approach, though Hutchinson's primary focus is race, while Hassan and Sandhu cover racism, sexism, ageism, and homo-bi transphobia too. They're both aiming squarely at the business how-to market, most shamelessly in the case of the latter, which again and again mentions the business case for diversity and inclusion and barely makes the moral case at all. Steve Sailer has noted many such cases that one of the leading causes, or how would you say, obsessions, passions amongst activist, intersectional Black women is napping. I am not making this up. You know, you've heard me say, and you've heard other people say, that these people constantly claim that they are exhausted. Well, you know, if you go to their Twitter feeds or their Facebook pages, or if you look at the number of, you know, of speeches and workshops that they do, they don't seem exhausted, do they? Exhausted people really don't want to do much of anything. Exhaustion is typically correlated to depression. But no, there's a solution to that. Since that, you know, that Black people have to work 2 or 5 or 10 times as hard and be 2 or 5 or 10 times as smart as your average mediocre white man, that's the source of their exhaustion. And so they should nap. They should not work, nap, and get paid for it, and get fully paid for it. I don't know how long this grift can go on for. Of course, the cost of university college education in the United States continues to grow. And one of the reasons is because professors, why would we want to hire professors? No, we hire diversity officers. Now, and again, this is entirely parasitic. And in fact, you know, given that the surplus created by capitalism is now gone, we are now engaged in an experiment to see just how parasitical our societies can become before they collapse utterly. I'm going to move on to Theater Thursday shortly, but let's have a look at the chat before we do. And let's go to the bottom. British American says almost none of those cops and public servants are going to collect on those pensions. The money won't be there. It ain't there now. My opinion is don't call it public service unless it's truly service, a la the old aristocrats who governed without any salary, or the nuns who used to staff hospitals without any salary. I'm sick to death, maybe some of you are too, with all this talk of frontline workers. Oh, and their tremendous sacrifices. Oh, all the hours that they worked. Oh, and all the overtime they got. These people are paid and well paid for their work. They're not doing it for charitable reasons. Oscar Toe says public service is one of those phrases like anti-fascist. British American, again, remember that old arrangement, public service jobs, your salary was low, but at least you had job security and decent pension. Now it's large salary, huge pension, and still job security. I remember going back to the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, they had this leader called Tim Hudak, who had just guaranteed that, no, I'm not going to fire any civil servants. Well, why wouldn't you fire them? They're parasites for the most part, and they all vote against your party. That's one of the reasons why, well, the Conservatives are hopeless, because they don't understand the friend-enemy principle of Carl Schmitt that is at the heart of politics, that you reward your friends and you punish your enemies. Oscar Toe says, I don't really think that these Redditors know what war is actually like until they get in the middle of it. They are really shooting at us, guys. Yeah, well, not yet. Setting up obstacles in the living room. Oh, no, not the Grand National again, says Zen Master. Kim is a horse-assed woman. That's a different type, not my preference, says a true green bird. Well, she's got those butt implants. You know that she actually did an ad campaign for toilet paper a few years ago? A bit on the nose, as they say. Well, not on the nose exactly. Did you see the article about the Canadian super sniper going over to kick Russian ass? I think I mentioned that. It's up on the Drudge report. Honestly, I've always liked horse-faced women, says Drew Greenberg. Physically, she's rather attractive. We got anyone else here? Seems to be reduced to just a couple. Respectable commenting name says, what do you mean soon? Did you miss Google seizing domain names 5 years ago? Payment processors deflatforming people because they were on the wrong whom list? No, I didn't miss any of that. Except it's likely to get worse. Likely to get worse. He continues, this already here is just going to get much more blatant, like as it was with the honkening. Yes, and do you know that honk honk means Heil Hitler? Yes, that is a popular belief amongst Canada's elite. I am not making this up. British American says it now seems that the obscene pension plans given to police throughout North America were planned to avoid mass resignations once the cops had to be called on to break protests on behalf of regimes. The Canadian banking system, once the envy of the world, no longer. Okay, so we're talking about war. Everyone's talking about war now, even though it is thousands of miles away and doesn't affect us in the slightest. Well, the sanctions certainly do, and more to come. But this is, I'm talking about a movie based on a real war, and it was called the Continuation War. The second war between Russia and Finland. The so-called Winter War began with the Soviet invasion of Finland on November 30th, 1939, and ended on March 13th, 1940. Yes, plucky little Finland. Yes, let's stand up for Finland. And what did the Western powers do for Finland? Nothing. Zero. Just as Warsaw was broken during the uprising in 1944 and afterwards, what did Poland's supposed allies do for Poland? Nothing. It is ironic that the reason for the war was that Leningrad, as it was then called, that Finland was so close to Leningrad that, a defense of it was difficult or not impossible. And what Stalin did was he offered a trade of territory. Under the deal that Stalin offered, Finland would have actually ended up with more territory than previously. The Finns fought hard, and the ferocity of their resistance shocked the Soviets, but a very one-sided fight. The Continuation War began in 1941 after Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and of course, that meant that they were no longer allies. And so Finland re-entered the war on the side of Germany. And it lasted for 3 years. And Finland lost a territory, and they also lost their seaport, Pagamo, the Arctic Sea. The map was redrawn in a deliberately insulting way, where Finland goes almost to the Arctic Sea, and then there's a tiny little strip of territory that was removed. Just spiteful, really. Now, of course, we all know how the Continuation War ended up, and I suppose that is a problem for movies. If you're watching a World War II movie and it's an American movie, well, typically, sacrifices are made. Soldiers make sacrifices, but the good guys win, right? Well, it's a little different here that Finland lost both wars. that Finland made significant advances at the beginning of the war, including taking back that part of the Karelian peninsula, which it had lost to Russia. And there was the typical overconfidence in these situations that, oh, the war is going to be over in a couple of months and we can all go home, or maybe we're going to, seize Leningrad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, Finland was part of the siege of Leningrad, which was relieved only in January 1944. This film is called The Unknown Soldier, and it is co-written and directed by a Finn called Aku Louhinis. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. I don't mean to be offensive. It's a remarkable film in several respects. One being, it is the most expensive film ever made in Finland. Actually, I should mention that this film, it's a remake, if you will, of a previous adaptation of the story, which is a novel by Väinö Linna from 1954. This is the type of movie that the assumption is made, or there's the hope that everyone is going to see it, because if everyone doesn't go to see it, a lot of money is going to be lost. And in the event, the budget of it was 7 million euros, and the box office was 13.5 euros, that's not a profit. Typically, you need to make 2.5 times as much as the budget at the box office. But of course, there are sales to television and sales of DVDs and Blu-rays. And this film is available on Amazon Prime to rent, and you can get the Blu-ray at Amazon as well for a nice price of £23. The film, it's just a warning. It is not as, say, intense and as horrifying as Come and See, a novel about, or the film about, partisan attacks and German atrocities in White Russia during World War II. But it is very intense indeed, and exceedingly realistic and not romantic. It is simply not romantic, and it gives, it's a rather quotidian look at the life of soldiers during such a conflict, or any conflict. We see something of the home front, not a great deal, but these soldiers, many of them have wives and children, and many of them have sweethearts at home. I should mention that this film, it's available in 3 different versions, and I watched the 3-hour Finnish theatrical release. The Western release, or the North American release, was 2 hours and 12 minutes, but there is also a mini series release, which is significantly longer than 3 hours. I think it's about 4.5 hours. I didn't, notice a lot of padding in this film, not at all. And I will say that it is really beautifully shot. And the let's see, the cinematographer is, I get a listing of that here, but it's beautifully shot, and the sound design is especially impressive. Now, at the beginning of the war, we see we see the soldiers in the summer, we see them in autumn, we see them when there's good weather, and we see them in autumn when it seems to be pouring rain every day and it is rather hellish. And then we see them in the winter fighting in their white camouflage and on skis. And these soldiers are the ones that the three soldiers that we focus on. They love Karelia, the Karelian forest. It's vast stands of pine trees. This Karelia is special to Finland. It occupies a special place, and you can see, I suppose, one manifestation of that is how often it is mentioned in the music of Jean Sibelius, of course, one of the greatest Finns. These vast dark pine forests, they touch Finnish souls. So the main characters are Antero or Antti Roka, and he is a farmer, and he is from Karelia, and he is played by Eero Aho, and he is a very interesting character indeed, because he is a great soldier and a great leader of men, but he's untrainable. He's an absolute wild card that he considers military discipline to be pointless. And it's explained to him several times by superior officers that, okay, perhaps you don't need it, but others do. And there has to be a chain of command. Orders have to be respected. Trivial orders and important orders, all the same, they have to be respected. And the other characters, Koskela, Vili Koskela, played by Jussi Vatanen. He's another kind of wild card as well. That in one scene he gets after a victory, he gets terribly drunk. We see that the whole the company gets terribly drunk, and he wanders into the officers' quarters and starts yelling and slugs an officer. Somehow he is not he's not mustered out for this. We see a lot of insubordination in this movie, and I suppose the movie got mixed reviews in Finland, and I suppose a lot of people thought that it was insulting to the memory of the cause and the memory of the soldiers who served so bravely. It's also been called a pacifist movie, and I don't see it as a pacifist movie. I just see it as a description of war as it is. We also have Jorma Karaloto, played by Johannes Holopainen. He is the most, he's a very gung-ho soldier, a very, very patriotic Finn who dreams of glory. Of course, at the very beginning, in one of the first scenes of the film, we see him as he's sent out to battle for the first time, and he's frozen on the ground in absolute terror. He cannot move. He later overcomes his fear, but throughout this film, we are given very very intense scenes of soldiers panicking, surrendering to terror, and we see two Finnish soldiers shot by their officers for insubordination. We see near the end a colonel who seems to have lost the plot of what is going on in the war. That is to say, that the Finns have lost the war, and it's sauve-qui peut. They can stick around to fight the Russians, but they will be slaughtered, every single one of them. To see men helpless on the road as they're strafed by planes, to see a small company or a platoon of men attempting to take on tanks, that's a terrifying experience indeed. That it's been said that war is boredom interrupted by moments of terror. And that's what we get in this film. I like the acting very much indeed. The three main figures that we see are very different from each other. And their reasons for fighting in the war are different. I don't know. The question of sacrifice comes up quite often. You know, if you lose a war, is your sacrifice pointless? Well, I don't think that it is, and I don't know that the film argues that it is. And not to sound cynical, but the sacrifice of soldiers, they can be seen as martyrs. Creating a myth. And as Georges Sorel reminds us, myth is quite powerful indeed. Certainly, a nation as small and thinly populated as Finland, taking on the Soviet Union not once but twice is remarkable, and it is something to be proud of. No question about that at all. I haven't seen the first picture, the first version of The Unknown Soldier, but I can highly recommend this. It is a grim movie. It has its moments of lightheartedness and moments of humor, but if you're considering watching this, you should know what you're in for. It's not a raw movie, but it seems to me that in any war, doesn't the raw come from people who are not actually involved in it? To see your friends, to see your comrades, to see your kinsmen, torn to pieces, blown up, shot, blinded, dying in agony, doesn't really lend itself to raw, does it? But I think that this is a beautiful looking and well acted and moving film. And again, I highly recommend it. So those are my thoughts on The Unknown Soldier. Let's have a final look at the chat. Contracoup says most of us need to realize that progressives don't care about hypocrisy or being inconsistent because they aren't acting in good faith. Pointing out that they are now supporting Nazis is useless. It may be useless, but I'm going to keep pointing it out. I understand your point. I understand. No, they are not acting in good faith. What's it? Yeah, you got to get boosted, says David Leonhardt of the New York Times, because that's going to, lessen your chance of contracting COVID-19. This has been blown out of the water in country after country after country after country, but they keep repeating this as if, the words to them are just talisman. They think they have magic powers. They use words as invocations, and it seems to be working for them. True Greenberg says, also worth noting that even the edgiest of rightists will jump at the chance to condemn neo-Nazis if it means owning the libs. Well, I'm not one of those people who's constantly finding Nazis everywhere. But when you come across, the famed independent reporter from the Kiev Independent called Ilya, what's his name, Ponomarenko, who actually tweeted and included a photograph of him being baptized, as it were, by the Azovites. Yes, he is a real neo-Nazi, not a crypto-Nazi. And of course, the atrocities committed by the Ukraine government in eastern Ukraine, including the deliberate destruction of many churches and the indiscriminate shelling of civilians with the attendant civilian deaths Well, we just don't care about that, do we? And when I see Jacinda, I feel nostalgic about Mr. Ed, says Zen Master. Oscar To says carbon credits are like the rich people not caring for the price of gas. They love to feel like they're suffering from a good cause. Maybe there's something to this idea that these rich people, these really rich people, are thrilled at gasoline prices spiking, at the price of steak and hamburger spiking. It's said that Gore Vidal said, it's not enough to succeed, others may fail. Now, that's a wicked way of looking at the world, but that's the way that our elite looks at the world. What's the point in enjoying, a tea house or a porterhouse steak if these proles, if these schlubs, if these Untermenschen get to enjoy it too? I mean, they can afford the prices. They can afford a regime where meat now in supermarkets is treated like razor blades, that it has, electronic devices on it, because people, just grabbing all this stuff and sticking under their jackets or whatever. Ardern summoned Sauron, says Dan. And for some final, hello to Caligula 138. Who says, I just got Kevin McDonald's new book today, Individualism and the Western Liberal Tradition, subtitled Evolutionary Origins, History, and Prospects for the Future. Anran says, I got confused at times as I couldn't keep some of the names straight. All in all, this is certainly a film I highly recommend. Anran adds, I didn't see it as pacifist either. Oscar To says, I just pour black pepper on my food in ungodly amounts. I saw the influence of Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line in a number of scenes, says Anran. Thin Red Line, better than Saving Private Ryan, says Popcast88. Saving Private Ryan enraged me for various reasons. That soldiers fight because they're ordered to fight. That's how it works. And so the movie begins, with the invasion of the storming of Omaha Beach. And we see American servicemen howling like monkeys as they're torn to pieces by heavy machine gun fire. But apparently all of this slaughter was worth it because Private Ryan got saved. It's just Spielberg's sentimentality. I cannot bear it. Anran says, I enjoyed Unknown Soldier, but I'm not sure it needed to be 3 hours long. As I say, the American theatrical release and the one that you get on Blu-ray is like 2 hours and 12 minutes. Metal Mike says, how was your eye, KMG? Less hideous than it was, but still hideous. And I'm beginning to suspect that I have broken or chipped a bone there. I think I'm going to have to go to a medical clinic over the weekend and have this checked out. But some people like the eye patch. Saving Private Ryan is an anti-German movie, says Caligula 138. Yo Mama says, bring back movie intermissions. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. You get to sell more stuff at the stand that way, right? Gamion, hello, says, did KMG talk about Facebook allowing calls to violence against Russians? Yes, indeed, I did. And I lived through the Cold War, and I was an enthusiastic Cold Warrior. I never saw anything like this during the Cold War. It didn't come close to it. This level of hysteria, this level of hatred, this level of pettiness. Never saw anything like it. And, well, I have to say that I can think of no other reason for this. Well, there's the reason that Spencer Craven mentioned at the beginning, the secular religiosity. But it's part of the Great Reset, isn't it? I mean, the Untermenschen have to be put in their place. I next week I'm going to be discussing a movie from the Soviet Union made by Vladimir Motel in 1970 called White Sun of the Desert. And a week after that, I'm going to be discussing Ken Loach's heartbreaking film from 1969 about a troubled a boy in South Yorkshire, and it is called Kes. Tomorrow on the book club, I'm going to be discussing Paul Gottfried's new book, Anti-Fascism. So that's it for today, folks. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada and wish to make a donation to the live stream, this may be done directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.